I built my parents' business for 8 years. At my brother's wedding, Dad signed it over to him. I didn't argue. I just left. My brother ran it into the ground within a year. Dad left me a voicemail. For minutes of crying. I haven't called back. My name's Owen. I'm 34, and I want to tell you about the time my father cried on a voicemail for 4 straight minutes. I know that sounds like something you'd skip past, but trust me, the context is what makes it. Because 6 months before that voicemail, the same man looked me in the eye at my brother's wedding reception and handed everything I'd built to someone who couldn't manage a lemonade stand without running out of cups. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me start from the beginning. I grew up in Prescott, Arizona. Small town, big sky. The kind of place where everyone knows your truck before they know your name. My dad, Hank, owned a custom cabinetry and millwork shop called Callahan & Sons. And yeah, that Sons was plural on purpose. He started the business when I was about 12 and my younger brother, Griffin, was 9. From the day that sign went up, my dad talked about the two of us taking it over someday, like it was destiny. Like it was already written in stone somewhere, and we were just waiting to grow into it. Here's the thing about Griffin and me. We're about as different as two people who share DNA can be. I was the quiet one. I liked working with my hands, liked the smell of fresh-cut oak, liked the satisfaction of seeing a set of cabinets go from a stack of lumber to something beautiful that a family would use every day. Griffin was the social one, the charmer, the one who could walk into a room and have everyone laughing within 5 minutes. He played baseball in high school, dated the homecoming queen, got a business degree from Arizona State that he mostly used to throw better tailgate parties. I dropped out of community college after 1 semester because I already knew what I wanted to do. I wanted to build things. I started working at the shop full-time when I was 19. Not part-time, not summers, full-time. I learned every machine, every technique, every supplier relationship. By the time I was 22, I was running jobs on my own. By 25, I was basically managing the production floor while my dad handled sales and client meetings. And let me tell you, I loved it. I loved waking up at 5 in the morning and driving to the shop before the sun came up. I loved the sound of the table saw kicking on. I loved that my dad and I had this thing together, this business that we were building side by side. Griffin, meanwhile, was doing what Griffin always did. He bounced around, sold insurance for a while, tried real estate, worked at a car dealership for about 8 months before he decided that was beneath him. Every Thanksgiving he'd show up with a new girlfriend and a new career plan, and my mom, Jolene, would beam at him like he'd just discovered fire. Meanwhile, I'd be sitting there with sawdust still in my hair, and she'd ask me if I'd thought about going back to school. I'm not bitter about that. Okay, maybe I'm a little bitter. But the point is, Griffin was the golden child. Always had been. He had this way of making everything he did sound more impressive than it was. He'd sell 3 houses in a year and talk about it like he'd conquered Wall Street. I'd increase our shop revenue by 40% and my dad would nod and say, "Good work, bud." When I was 26, I convinced my dad to expand into kitchen remodeling, not just cabinetry. Full-service design, installation, the works. It took some persuading because Hank was old school and cautious, but I put together a business plan, found a couple of subcontractors we could partner with, and landed our first full kitchen job within 2 months. That decision tripled our revenue over the next 3 years. Tripled it. We went from a small shop doing maybe $300,000 a year to pulling in close to $1 million. I hired for more guys. I redesigned our workflow. I built relationships with builders and interior designers all over Yavapai County. I was working 60-hour weeks, and I didn't care because I was building something that mattered. My dad started talking about retirement around the time I turned 30. Nothing formal, just comments here and there. He'd say things like, "One of these days I'm gonna let you boys handle all this and go fishing." And I'd smile because I figured that was the plan. I was already handling most of it anyway. The boys part always nagged at me a little, but I told myself it was just a figure of speech. Griffin hadn't set foot in the shop in years except to grab a beer from the mini fridge in the break room. Then Griffin got engaged to a woman named Sutton. Sutton was nice enough, came from money, had opinions about everything from granite countertops to global politics. The engagement seemed to flip a switch in Griffin. Suddenly he was talking about settling down, putting down roots, finding something stable. And wouldn't you know it, right around that time, he started showing up at the shop. At first it was just a couple hours a week. He'd come in wearing khakis and a button-down like he was visiting a zoo. ask a few questions, shake hands with the guys. My dad ate it up. He'd walk Griffin around, introducing him to clients like he was the prodigal son returning. Meanwhile, I was in the back actually building the cabinets those clients were paying for. But sure, let's give Griffin the tour. I told myself it was fine. I told myself there was room for both of us. Griffin could handle sales or marketing or client relations, and I'd keep doing what I did best. We'd be Callahan and Sons for real. I even sat down with Griffin one night over beers and tried to talk about how we could divide responsibilities. He nodded along, said all the right things, told me he respected everything I'd done. And I believed him, because he was my brother, and despite everything, I love the guy. The wedding was set for October. Beautiful venue up near Sedona, red rocks in the background, the whole 9 yards. Sutton's family paid for most of it, which was good because it was the kind of wedding that costs more than some people's houses. I was Griffin's best man. I wrote a speech and everything, told some funny stories about us growing up, talked about how proud I was of him. I meant every word. The reception was at this gorgeous lodge with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the canyon. About 200 people, open bar, a band that actually knew how to play. It was a great party. I was having a good time. I brought my girlfriend, Waverly, who I'd been with for about a year at that point, and we were dancing and laughing and everything felt right. Then my dad tapped me on the shoulder and asked if I could come outside for a minute. He said he wanted to talk to me and Griffin together. He had something he wanted to announce. I figured it was the retirement thing. Maybe he was going to make it official, announce that he was handing the reins over to us. I was actually excited. I followed him out to this little patio area where Griffin and Sutton were already standing with glasses of champagne. My dad had this look on his face, the one he gets when he thinks he's about to do something generous. He pulled out a folder, and inside that folder was a transfer of ownership agreement for Callahan and Sons. He'd had a lawyer draw it up and everything. He gave a little speech about legacy and family and how proud he was. And then he handed the folder to Griffin. Just Griffin. Sole ownership. Every share, every asset, the building, the equipment, the client list, the name. All of it. Signed, notarized, done. He didn't even look at me when he did it. I stood there. That's all I did for what felt like a full minute. I just stood there on that patio with the sounds of the wedding band bleeding through the glass doors behind me. And I stared at my father while he hugged my brother and clapped him on the back like they'd just won the Super Bowl together. Sutton was already on the phone telling someone, probably her mother. Griffin was grinning that grin of his, the one that made everyone in the room feel like they were lucky to be near him. And me. I was standing 3 feet away with my hands at my sides, trying to figure out if I'd somehow misunderstood what just happened. I hadn't misunderstood. "Dad," I said. My voice came out quieter than I expected. "What about me?" Hank turned to me, and I could see it in his eyes. He'd rehearsed this part. He'd known I was going to ask, and he'd prepared an answer the way you prepare for an awkward question in a job interview. "Owen, this is about giving Griffin a foundation," he said. "You've always been solid. You don't need a hand up. Griffin needs this. He needs something to anchor him." I blinked at him. "I built that business, Dad. I grew it. I'm the one who's been there every single day for 8 years. And I appreciate that more than you know," he said. "But Griffin is ready now. He's got Sutton. He's settling down. This is his chance to step up. And you'll still be there. You'll still be doing what you do." "Doing what I do?" I repeated. "Working for Griffin." My dad shifted his weight. "Working with Griffin. It's a family business, Owen. It's not about titles." Except he'd just given Griffin the only title that mattered. Owner. The one word that meant everything. The one that said, "This is mine, and you're just here." Griffin, to his credit, at least had the decency to look slightly uncomfortable. He stepped forward and put his hand on my shoulder. "Bro, nothing changes. You're the backbone of this place. I'm just gonna handle the business side. You keep doing your thing." My thing. Like I was a hobby. Like 8 years of my life, 60-hour weeks, the expansion that tripled our revenue, the relationships I'd built with every client and every supplier, all of that was just my thing. I looked at the 3 of them standing there. My father with his rehearsed justifications, my brother with his champagne and his new ownership papers, Sutton already calculating something behind her eyes. And I made a decision right there on that patio that would change everything. I didn't argue. I didn't yell. I didn't make a scene at my brother's wedding. I just nodded. I said, "Okay." And then I walked back inside, found Waverly, told her we were leaving, and we drove home in silence. The next morning I woke up at 4 like I always did. Force of habit. I lay in bed staring at the ceiling for about an hour, running through everything in my head. Then I got up, drove to the shop one last time, and cleaned out my personal tools. I had about $15,000 worth of my own equipment in there. Chisels my grandfather gave me, a custom router set, my measuring instruments. I loaded it all into my truck before anyone else showed up. Then I left my shop key on the workbench with a note that said, "Good luck." Griffin called me around 9 that morning. I let it go to voicemail. He called again at noon. Voicemail. My dad called it too. Voicemail. My mom called at 6 and left a message that said, and I quote, "Owen, stop being dramatic. Your father did what he thought was best. Come to dinner on Sunday and we'll talk about it like adults." I did not go to dinner on Sunday. Instead, I spent that week doing something I should have done years ago. I wrote out everything on a legal pad. Every client relationship, every design, every process, every supplier contact that existed because of me. Then I called a buddy named Deacon who practiced business law in Flagstaff. I asked one question. If I leave and start my own shop, what can they do about it? Deacon's answer was beautiful. Nothing. You never signed a non-compete. You don't have an employment contract. You were working as a family member with no formal agreements. Owen, you're free. I hung up that phone, and for the first time in a week, I smiled. The next few months were brutal. I had savings, about $40,000, which sounds like a lot until you're trying to start a cabinetry business from scratch. Workspace, materials, insurance, a bigger truck. Waverly and I were living in a 2-bedroom rental, and suddenly every dollar mattered. Griffin, meanwhile, was settling into his new role with all the subtlety of a bull in a china shop. Within the first month, he rebranded everything. New logo, new website, new business cards with his name bigger than the company name. He hired a social media manager for a custom cabinetry shop in Prescott, Arizona, and started posting videos of himself walking through the shop with his sleeves rolled up, talking about craftsmanship like he'd been doing it for decades instead of about 45 minutes. The guys I'd hired and trained started calling me. Harlan, who'd been with us for 5 years, said Griffin had changed the production schedule to prioritize high-visibility projects, which meant whatever clients had the biggest social media presence. The bread-and-butter jobs were getting pushed to the back. Emmett called next and said Griffin was ordering from new suppliers with better payment terms, but garbage quality. They were getting complaints about warping and uneven finishes for the first time in the company's history. I listened to all of this, and I felt two things simultaneously. Sadness, because I'd built that shop into something I was proud of, and watching it deteriorate hurt. And something else. Something I'm not totally proud of, but I'm going to be honest about. I felt vindicated. Every problem, every mistake Griffin made was proof that what I'd done for 8 years actually mattered. That you couldn't fake competence with a good smile and a new logo. 3 months in, Griffin lost a major client. A custom home builder named Cordell who'd been with us for 4 years. Cordell called me directly. He said he'd gotten a delivery of bathroom vanities that looked like they'd been assembled by someone who'd watched a YouTube tutorial once. He asked if I was still in the game. I told him I was working on it. He said, "Work faster." 6 months in, Harlan and another installer named Boyd quit Callahan. They called asking if I had room. I didn't, not yet. But I told them to hang tight. Here's where things really started to hurt, though. It wasn't just the business, it was the family. My mom called every couple weeks with some version of the same guilt trip. I was being petty. I was tearing the family apart. Every conversation ended with her saying, "Your father is heartbroken," and me wanting to say, then maybe he should have thought about that before he gave away everything I built. But I didn't. I just said, "I love you, Mom. I've got to go." My dad called occasionally. Hank was the kind of man who expressed emotions about as frequently as a cactus expressed moisture. But when he did call, it was always the same. "Come back to the shop. Griffin needs your help." Not once did he say he was sorry. Not once did he acknowledge what he'd done was wrong. It was always about what Griffin needed. Waverly was the one who kept me sane. She'd sit with me on the back porch at night, and she never once told me to just get over it or go back. She'd say, "You know what you're worth. Now go prove it to everyone else." That woman believed in me when I was running on fumes and fury, and that kind of faith is worth more than any business. 8 months after I walked away from Callahan & Sons, I signed a lease on a 2,500 square foot workshop space on the outskirts of town. It wasn't much, but it was mine. I called it Ridgeline Custom Woodworks. No, and Sons. No promises to anyone's legacy. Just a name that sounded like what I wanted to build. Something solid, something high, something that stood above the rest. I remember the night I hung the sign. Waverly was there, and so was Deacon, and a couple buddies who'd helped me set up the shop. We stood in the parking lot drinking cheap beer and looking up at that sign, and I thought about my dad handing that folder to Griffin on the patio. I made myself a promise. I was going to build something so good that the comparison would speak for itself. I wasn't going to badmouth anyone. I was just going to work. And that's exactly what I did. The first 3 months of Ridgeline Custom Woodworks were the hardest months of my life. And I say that as someone who once had to re-shingle a roof in August in Arizona. I had a workshop, tools, and about $12,000 left in savings. That's it. No clients on the books, no employees, no reputation outside of whatever word of mouth was floating around from my Callahan days. I was a one-man operation building sample pieces during the day and cold calling builders and designers at night. I'm going to be honest, there were moments when I wondered if I'd made a massive mistake. There's a difference between knowing you're good at something and actually proving it to the market when you're starting from zero. Some nights I'd sit in my truck in the shop parking lot after a 14-hour day with nothing to show for it, and think about how easy it would be to just call my dad and go back. Swallow my pride, work under Griffin, collect a paycheck. Waverly would have supported me either way. She never pressured me in either direction. But every time that thought crept in, I'd remember the patio. I'd remember my father's face when he handed that folder to Griffin without even looking at me. And the thought would pass. My first real break came from Cordell, the builder who'd called me months earlier asking if I was still in the game. True to his word, he threw me a job the week after I opened. It was a small one, a set of built-in bookshelves for a model home, but it was work. Real, paying work. I built those bookshelves like they were going in a museum. Every joint was perfect. Every finish was flawless. I delivered them 2 days early and under budget. Cordell walked through the model home, ran his hand along the shelves, and said 4 words that changed my trajectory. Same Owen as always. He gave me 3 more jobs that month. Then he mentioned my name to another builder named Sloan Whitfield, who was developing a small luxury subdivision south of town. Sloan came to my shop, looked at my samples, and gave me a contract for custom cabinetry in 6 houses. 6 houses. I almost fell over. That contract was the turning point. It was enough money to bring on 1 employee, and I knew exactly who to call. Harlan picked up on the first ring. He'd been doing freelance handyman work since leaving Callahan and was miserable. He started the following Monday. Boyd came on a month later. Having those 2 guys in the shop felt like putting on a pair of boots that actually fit. They knew how I worked. They knew my standards. They knew what quality meant because I trained them myself. Over the next few months, things started to snowball in the best possible way. Every job I completed generated another referral. An interior designer named Rosalind, who I'd worked with back at Callahan, tracked me down and started sending clients my way. She told me she'd stopped recommending Callahan after the 3rd complaint about finish quality. A real estate agent I'd never even met called me because a homeowner had raved about a bathroom vanity I'd built for Cordell's subdivision. The work was coming in faster than I could handle it. I hired 2 more guys by month 6. I invested in a CNC router that let me take on more complex design work. I built out a small showroom in the front of my workshop where clients could see samples and finishes in person. Waverly helped me design the space, and she had a gift for it. She made a 2,500 square foot industrial shop look warm and professional and inviting. People would walk in and immediately feel like they were dealing with someone who cared about the details. Because I did. Meanwhile, I was getting reports from the Callahan side that were increasingly grim. Griffin had burned through Cordell's replacement within 2 months. He'd taken on a major restaurant renovation downtown and blown the deadline by 6 weeks, which resulted in a penalty clause that cost the company about $30,000. He'd fired Emmett over some petty disagreement about scheduling and lost one of the best finished carpenters in the county. And the social media thing had become a running joke in the local trades community. Griffin was posting more content about the business than he was actually doing business. I want to be clear about something. I didn't enjoy watching Callahan fail. That shop had my fingerprints all over it. I'd poured 8 years of my life into those walls. Every time I heard about another lost client or another quality complaint, it was like hearing about a house you used to live in slowly falling apart. It didn't matter that I wasn't the one living there anymore. It still stung. But I also couldn't deny that there was a lesson being taught. and it wasn't one I was delivering. It was just reality. Running a custom woodworking shop isn't about branding and social media presence. It's about knowing your materials, respecting your timelines, and building things that last. Griffin had the first part of the equation, the image, and none of the substance. And substance is what keeps clients coming back. Around month 8, something happened that I wasn't expecting. My mom showed up at my shop. No warning, no phone call, just Jolene walking through my front door on a Wednesday afternoon with her purse over her shoulder and a look on her face like she'd just driven past a car accident and couldn't decide if she was concerned or angry. She looked around the showroom, touched a few samples, and then turned to me and said, "This is nice, Owen." "Thanks, Mom. Your father doesn't know I'm here." "Okay." She sat down in one of the chairs Waverly had picked out, and she looked tired. Not physically tired, but the kind of tired that comes from holding something together that keeps trying to fall apart. "Griffin is struggling," she said. "The business isn't doing well. He won't admit it, but I can see the stress on his face. Your father sees it too, but he won't say anything because that would mean admitting he made a mistake." I leaned against my workbench and crossed my arms. "Mom, I'm sorry Griffin is struggling, but I don't know what you want me to do about it. Come back. Help him. You two could run it together." Dad gave it to Griffin. "All of it. There's no together in sole ownership." "Owen, don't be stubborn." "I'm not being stubborn, Mom. I'm being accurate. Dad made a choice. He chose Griffin. And now I've made a choice too. I chose myself." She sat there for a long time without saying anything. Then she stood up, walked over to where I was standing, and put her hand on my cheek. Her eyes were wet. "I'm proud of you," she said. "I should have said that a long time ago." Then she left, and I stood in my shop for about 10 minutes afterward, just breathing, because that was the first time my mother had ever said those words to me without qualifying them. No, however, just pride, standing there on its own. That visit did something to me. It softened something I didn't know had gotten hard. I'd been carrying anger around like a backpack full of rocks, and hearing my mom say she was proud of me didn't remove all the rocks, but it took a few out. I started sleeping better. I started laughing more. Waverly noticed. She said I was starting to look like myself again. By month 10, Ridgeline was doing nearly as much revenue as Callahan had been doing when I left, and we were still growing. I'd signed contracts with 2 more builders and was getting inquiries from homeowners in Sedona and Cottonwood. I was working hard, but it was the good kind of hard. The kind where you're building something that's yours, something nobody can take away because you earned every inch of it. Waverly and I talked about the future for the first time in a while. Not just surviving, but planning. We talked about buying a house. We talked about hiring a dedicated salesperson so I could spend more time in the shop. We talked about eventually opening a second location. For the first time in over a year, I felt like I was standing on solid ground instead of balancing on a tightrope. The rocks in the backpack were getting lighter, but there were still a few left. Because I knew, somewhere in the back of my mind, that the thing with my dad wasn't finished. Griffin's situation was getting worse by the week, and my father was the kind of man who'd rather chew glass than admit he was wrong. Something was going to give. I just didn't know when. Turns out, it wouldn't be long. 11 months after I walked away from Callahan & Sons, I got a phone call that set the dominoes falling. It was from Sloan Whitfield, the developer who'd given me my first big contract. She was sitting on a new project, a 12-unit luxury townhome development on the north side of Prescott, and she wanted Ridgeline to handle all the custom cabinetry, built-ins, and millwork for every unit. We're talking about a contract worth roughly $400,000 spread over 18 months. It was the single biggest opportunity I'd ever been offered. I met Sloan at her office that Friday. She laid out the plans, the timelines, the budget. It was ambitious but doable if I scaled up properly. I told her I'd need a couple weeks to put together a detailed proposal. She said, "Take your time. But Owen, I want to be transparent about something. You weren't my first call." I raised my eyebrows. "Who was?" "Callahan & Sons. I reached out to Griffin 3 weeks ago. He quoted me 20% below market, which made me nervous. Then he missed our follow-up meeting. Twice. I've been in this business long enough to know what that means." "What does it mean?" "It means the shop's in trouble. People who are running a healthy business don't underbid by 20% and then ghost their clients." She looked at me directly. "I know he's your brother. I'm not asking you to comment on his business. I'm asking if Ridgeline can deliver." "Ridgeline can deliver," I said. And I meant it. That night, Waverly and I sat at the kitchen table with a calculator and mapped out what it would take. 3 more craftsmen, a dust collection upgrade, additional shop space, and a project manager to handle logistics. It was a big leap, but the numbers worked. I called Deacon the next morning, not for legal advice this time, but because over the past year he'd become one of my closest friends. I told him about the Sloan contract, and he said, "Owen, do you remember what you said to me the night you hung your sign? You said you were going to build something so good the comparison would speak for itself. This is what speaking for itself looks like." He was right, but there was a complication I hadn't anticipated. The following Tuesday, Griffin showed up at my shop. First time he'd been there. He pulled up in his truck, sat in the parking lot for about 5 minutes like he was working up the nerve, and then walked through the front door. Harlan saw him first and came to get me in the back. "Your brother's here," he said, in the same tone you'd use to tell someone there was a wasp in the kitchen. I came out to the showroom, and there was Griffin. He looked different, thinner. The easy confidence was gone, replaced by something I'd never seen on his face before. He looked like a man carrying a weight he wasn't strong enough to hold. "Hey, Owen." "Hey, Griff." He looked around the showroom, touched the edge of a walnut display cabinet I'd built as a sample piece, nodded slowly. "This is really nice, man." "Thanks." Long pause. He shoved his hands in his pockets. "Look, I'm not going to pretend I'm here for a social visit. The business is in trouble. I've lost about half our client base. Emmett's gone, and 2 other guys left last month. I'm behind on 3 projects, and I just got hit with a complaint from the contractor's board about the restaurant job." I waited. I didn't say anything. I just let him talk. "I need help, Owen. I need you to come back. We can restructure, make you a partner, give you equity. Whatever you want. Just please come back and help me fix this." I leaned against the counter and looked at my brother. Really looked at him. Past the thin face and the tired eyes and the desperation. I looked at the guy who'd stood on that patio 10 months ago holding a champagne glass while our father handed him everything I'd built. The guy who'd said, "Nothing changes, bro." The guy who'd taken my life's work and run it into the ground because he thought running a business was about logos and Instagram reels. "Griffin, let me ask you something. In the 10 months since you took over, did you ever once call me to ask how I ran production? How I scheduled jobs? How I managed quality control? How I maintained supplier relationships?" He stared at the floor. "No. Did you ever look at the systems I put in place? The workflow charts? The client files? I changed a lot of that stuff early on." "I know you did. How'd that work out?" He didn't answer. "Griff, I'm not coming back to Callahan. That part of my life is over. But I'm not going to stand here and kick you while you're down, either. You're my brother. What I will tell you is this. You need to go talk to Harlan. Not to hire him back, because he works for me now and I'm not giving him up. But Harlan understands production management. Buy him dinner, ask him questions, actually listen to the answers. And you need to fire your social media manager and put that money toward a quality control person. And you need to call every client you've lost and apologize. Not make excuses. Apologize. Some of them will come back. Most won't. But the ones who do will respect you for it." Griffin looked up at me. His eyes were red. "Do you hate me?" That question hit me harder than I expected, because the honest answer was complicated. I didn't hate Griffin. I hated what had happened. I hated that my father had valued charm over competence, potential over proof, the son who showed up over the son who built up. But Griffin was still my brother. He was still the kid I'd taught to ride a bike in our driveway, the teenager who'd snuck me into my first concert, the guy who'd called me crying when his first real girlfriend broke up with him. "No, Griff, I don't hate you, but I can't save you from this. You have to figure it out yourself." He nodded. He thanked me, and he left. That conversation lit a fire under me, but not in the way you might think. It wasn't about revenge or competition. It was about clarity. I didn't need my family's validation anymore. I just needed to keep building. Over the next 3 weeks, I put together the most detailed project proposal I'd ever written for Sloan's development. Material specifications, timeline benchmarks, quality assurance protocols, contingency plans. Waverly helped me design the presentation. Deacon reviewed the contract terms. I hired a project manager named Tully, a former general contractor who'd been looking for something less physically demanding after a back injury, and he was worth every penny from day one. When I presented the proposal to Sloan, she read through it in about 20 minutes, set it down, and said, "When can you start?" We shook hands. And just like that, Ridgeline Custom Woodworks had its first major contract. The news traveled fast. In a town like Prescott, word gets around when a big development chooses a shop, especially when that shop is barely a year old. Especially when the shop's owner is the brother of the guy who used to run the biggest cabinetry operation in town. People talked. I didn't. I just put my head down and got to work. I hired 3 new craftsmen that month and signed a lease on additional workspace. Tully built out a scheduling system that kept every project on track. Harlan trained the new guys the same way I'd trained him, with patience, precision, and zero tolerance for sloppy work. Boyd handled installations with the kind of care that made clients call me to say thank you, which in the construction world is about as rare as finding a unicorn in your living room. Everything was humming. The first units were on schedule. Sloan was happy. My team was happy. Waverly and I had made an offer on a house, a little 3-bedroom with a workshop out back that she was already planning to turn into a garden studio. Life was finally working. And then my dad called. It was a Thursday evening, just past 7. Waverly and I were eating dinner. I saw Dad on my phone screen and I let it ring. It went to voicemail. I figured it was the usual. Come back. Help Griffin. The family needs you. But I didn't listen to it that night. I put my phone on the counter and went back to my dinner. It wasn't until the next morning, sitting in my truck in the shop parking lot with a cup of coffee, that I played the voicemail. It was 4 minutes and 11 seconds long. And for the first 3 minutes, my father couldn't get a single word out. I sat in my truck and listened to my father cry. Not the kind of crying you do when you're a little sad. The kind that comes from somewhere deep, somewhere sealed off for years, and when it finally breaks open it takes everything with it. 3 minutes of breathing and sobbing and trying to start sentences that collapsed before they got anywhere. Then, around the 3-minute mark, he managed to speak. Owen, I'm so sorry, son. I did you wrong. I knew it when I did it, and I did it anyway because it was easier. It was easier to give it to Griffin because he was the one who needed it and you were the one who earned it. And I told myself that was the same thing, but it wasn't. You built that business with your hands and your time and your heart, and I gave it away like it was mine to give. And all I can think about is the look on your face on that patio. You didn't even argue. You just left. And that's what kills me. You didn't argue because you already knew what I was doing was wrong and you loved me enough not to make a scene at your brother's wedding. I don't deserve that. I don't deserve you. Pause. More crying. Then, quieter. Your mother told me about your shop. I drove past it last week and sat in the parking lot looking at your sign, and I thought about how proud I should have been. How proud I am. I just didn't know how to say it. I've never been good at this part, but I need you to know that I see what I did. And if you never talk to me again, I'll understand. But I hope you do. I love you, Owen. I always have. I just did a terrible job showing it. The voicemail ended. I sat in my truck for a long time. The coffee went cold. I kept replaying it. Not the words. The crying. 3 minutes of a man who'd shown about as much emotion my entire life as a fence post, completely falling apart. I didn't call him back. Not that day. Not the next day. Not the next week. I know some of you are probably thinking I should have called him immediately. But forgiveness isn't a light switch. You don't just flip it. Especially when the thing you're forgiving cost you 8 years of your life and your faith in the people who were supposed to have your back. I needed to process it on my own terms. Waverly understood. She said, "You'll know when you're ready." During those 2 weeks, Griffin called. Not to ask for help. He was selling Callahan and Sons, or what was left of it. More lost contracts, overdue supplier payments, a formal review from the contractor's board. "I'm not cut out for this, Owen," he said on the phone. I never was. I think I knew that from the beginning. I just wanted Dad to be proud of me the way he was proud of you. That sentence almost knocked the wind out of me, because it had never occurred to me that Griffin felt overlooked too, just from the opposite direction. I was the one who could do the work. He was the one who got the attention. But attention isn't the same as pride. My dad gave Griffin the business not because he was proud of him, but because he was worried about him. And Griffin had spent his whole life performing confidence to cover up the fact that he knew he was living in someone's shadow. We're a messed up family. But honestly, whose isn't? I told Griffin the first was sorry it went down this way. He thanked me for the advice I'd given him at my shop. He said he'd called the clients and apologized, and 3 of them had actually come back. Not enough to save the business, but enough to restore some dignity. We talked for 20 minutes, the longest conversation we'd had in over a year. When we hung up, I felt something crack open in my chest. Not painfully, More like a window being opened in a room that had been closed too long. 3 weeks after my dad left that voicemail, I drove to my parents' house on a Sunday morning. Waverly offered to come, but I told her this was something I needed to do alone. Same porch, same cracked flower pot by the front door that my mom always said she was going to replace, but never did. My dad was in the garage. He was sitting on a stool next to his old workbench, not doing anything, just sitting. When he saw me walk in, he stood up so fast he almost knocked the stool over. "Owen." "Hey, Dad." Silence. The garage smelled like motor oil and old sawdust, the same way it always had. "I got your voicemail," I said. He nodded. His jaw was tight. He was trying to hold it together. "I'm not going to pretend that everything's fine," I said. "It's not. What you did hurt me in a way I don't have a complete vocabulary for yet. You took the thing I'd given my life to and you handed it to someone else without even a conversation. At my brother's wedding, in front of his wife, like I was a footnote. He started to speak and I held up my hand. "Let me finish. You spent 8 years watching me build that business, and when it came time to decide its future, you chose the son who needed a project over the son who'd proven he could run one. And the worst part wasn't that you chose Griffin. The worst part was that you didn't even talk to me about it. You just decided, and I found out at a wedding reception." Tears were running down his face. He didn't wipe them. He just stood there and took it. "But here's the other thing," I said. "I listened to your voicemail about 30 times. And I know that was real, because Hank Callahan does not cry. So those 4 minutes told me more than anything you could have planned to say." He let out a breath that sounded like it had been trapped in his chest for months. "I'm not going to hold this over you forever," I said. "I'm not going to bring it up every holiday or use it as ammunition. But I need you to understand that things are different now. I have my own business. It's doing well. I built it from nothing, and I'm proud of it. And I need you to be proud of it too. Not of Griffin's version of me. Not of what you wish I'd done. Of what I actually did." My dad walked across the garage and he hugged me. Not a quick hug. Not a backpat hug. He held on to me like he was afraid I'd disappear, and he said, "I'm proud of you, Owen. I've always been proud of you. I was just too stupid and too stubborn to show it." I let him hold on, and I hugged him back. And for the first time in over a year, I felt like someone's son again. That was 6 months ago. Ridgeline Custom Woodworks is thriving. We finished the first phase of Sloane's project ahead of schedule, and she's already talking about phase 2. I've got a team of 9. Cordell sends me so much work I've had to start a wait list. Rosalind practically markets for me for free because she knows every project we touch is going to be perfect. Griffin sold the Callahan assets, took a loss, but got out clean. He's in commercial real estate now, and honestly, he seems happier. He stopped trying to be something he wasn't, and it turns out he's actually pretty good at sales when he's not pretending to be a craftsman. We grab lunch about once a month. We don't talk about the business much. We talk about sports and Sutton's cooking and whether Dad's ever going to fix that cracked flower pot. My mom calls every Sunday. She asks about the shop, about Waverly, about when we're going to give her grandkids. She never brings up what happened unless I do. I appreciate that. My dad comes by the shop sometimes. He doesn't say much. He just walks around, looks at the work, nods. Last week he stopped in front of a set of custom kitchen cabinets I'd built for a home in Sedona, white oak with hand-rubbed oil finish, and he stood there for a solid minute. Then he looked at me and said, "That's the best work I've ever seen come out of any shop, including mine." Coming from Hank Callahan, that's the equivalent of a standing ovation. Waverly and I closed on the house. She's already planted tomatoes and converted the back workshop into a pottery studio. Life is good. Not perfect, not a fairy tale, but good. The kind of good you earn. Someone asked me recently if I ever wish things had gone differently. If I wish my dad had just given me the business like he should have. And the honest answer is no. Because if he'd done the right thing, I'd still be building someone else's legacy. Instead, I'm building my own. And it turns out that's worth more than anything anyone could have handed me. My name's Owen Callahan. I'm 34 years old, and I'm exactly where I'm supposed to be.